Why the best government rules the least? Thoreau was right. What if I told you the greatest government isn't the one with the most power, but the one that dares to step back and let you grow? In a world where control is often mistaken for care and surveillance is sold as safety, it may sound outrageous to say that less government, less interference is not just preferable but moral. But that's exactly what Henry David Thoreau believed, and today I want to go all in on why he was right. Not just politically, but spiritually, psychologically, and practically. This isn't just about politics, this is about your life, your freedom, and your soul. Let's start with a question that might feel unsettling. When was the last time you made a major life decision that wasn't shaped even indirectly by some system of control? Think about it. The career path you chose, the way you spend your money, the rules you follow without questioning them. How many of those things are truly yours, and how many are shadows of a government that insists it knows what's best for you? This is not conspiracy. This is reality. And Thoreau saw it clearly over 150 years ago when he said, "That government is best which governs least." Why? Because the more laws you have, the more you condition people to obey instead of think. And when people stop thinking, they stop being free, even if their chains are invisible. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we should all live in chaos. I'm not suggesting we burn down the institutions or reject every form of order. But here's the catch: order that comes from within is infinitely more powerful than order imposed from above. A community that governs itself through trust, respect, and shared values will always be stronger than one held together by force or fear. Government, when it becomes too big, too invasive, too paternalistic, doesn't protect us, it stifles us. It replaces our capacity to choose with a checklist of compliance. It raises us like children who never get to grow up. And so here's the paradox: the more a government tries to do for us, the less we do for ourselves. The more it tries to solve our problems, the more we lose the muscle to solve them on our own. There's a kind of spiritual laziness that creeps in when we surrender too much responsibility. We stop asking deep questions. We stop taking risks. We stop being fully alive. And that's the real tragedy, not just a loss of freedom, but a loss of the will to be free.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
So ask yourself, how much of your life are you actually steering? And how much is being steered for you by a system that operates on autopilot, pretending to serve you but really just managing your behavior? Thoreau wasn't just making a political statement. He was making a moral one. He believed self-reliance wasn't just a virtue, it was the foundation of a just society. Because only when individuals are free to think, to act, to fail, and to rise again can society truly flourish. There's a deeper layer to all this, and it goes beyond laws and policies. It touches on something ancient and almost sacred, the idea that freedom is the natural state of the human soul. When we are children, we learn by exploring, falling, getting back up. That's how we grow. And yet, modern governments try to cushion every fall, regulate every path, and predict every outcome. They try to make life safe, but in doing so, they make it sterile. They strip away the unpredictability that gives life its meaning. And here's the crazy part: most of us want this. We've been trained to want it. We crave safety. We crave predictability. We prefer the dull certainty of control over the wild beauty of freedom. But deep down, something in us rebels, something ancient, something that remembers what it feels like to be truly alive. That's why every revolution, every rebellion, every act of civil disobedience is not just political, it's existential. It's a cry from the soul that says, I am not a cog. I am not a number. I am not yours to manage. And maybe that's why Thoreau didn't just write essays, he lived his philosophy. He went to the woods not to escape society, but to rediscover himself, to test what it means to live deliberately. Maybe that's what we all need, to step back from the noise, the systems, the rules, and ask the most important question of all: what kind of life do I actually want to live? Not the one I've been told to live, not the one that's been optimized for safety and efficiency, but the one that's mine. You see, the best government doesn't try to shape you. It trusts you to shape yourself. It doesn't treat you like a child. It treats you like a sovereign being, flawed, yes, but capable of greatness. And that's terrifying. Because it means there's no one to blame when things go wrong. But it's also liberating. Because it means the power to shape your life has always been in your hands. So let me ask you this: if all the systems around you disappeared tomorrow, if there were no rules, no enforcers, and no one to tell you what to do, what kind of person would you become? Would you rise or fall? Would you build or destroy? Would you lead yourself or look for someone else to follow? Maybe that's the real test of freedom, not what you do when someone is watching, but what you do when no one is. And maybe that's what Thoreau meant all along, that the best government is not the one that rules best, but the one that steps back and dares to believe you can rule yourself. The hidden cost of control, why obedience is the enemy of growth. When we think about government, we often imagine a distant entity, something abstract, bureaucratic, adorned with flags, offices, and officials. But what if the most dangerous form of government is not external, but internal? What if the real tyranny is the one we carry inside our minds, programmed into us through years of obedience? You see, the tragedy of modern life is not just that we are governed, it's that we have learned to govern ourselves in ways that mimic the very structures that limit us. And that, maybe more than anything else, should terrify us. Obedience is often masqueraded as virtue. From a young age, we're taught to obey, to sit quietly, raise our hands, follow rules, trust authority. And sure, on the surface, these behaviors help maintain order. But what they don't tell you is that this kind of obedience, blind, habitual, reflexive, is corrosive to the soul. It teaches you to value safety over truth, compliance over curiosity, and acceptance over authenticity. It dulls your edges, flattens your uniqueness, and turns you into a product of systems rather than a creator of life. Have you ever stopped to wonder how many of your daily behaviors are actually yours, and how many are just echoes of what you've been told to do? Here's the problem. Every time we obey without questioning, we surrender a little bit of ourselves. Not just our autonomy, but our capacity to think, to challenge, to imagine alternatives. And over time, that surrender becomes permanent. We internalize the voice of the state, the school, the institution. We become our own warden, keeping ourselves in line even when no one is watching. We stop needing a government to control us because we've already accepted its logic within our own minds. But this is not just political conditioning, it's spiritual erosion. Think about the last time you wanted to do something unpopular, unconventional, or risky. But did you hesitate? Did fear whisper in your ear? Did invisible rules pull you back? That's the cost of obedience. It doesn't just keep you from doing bad things, it keeps you from doing great things. It conditions you to believe that what is allowed is what is right, and what is forbidden is what is wrong. But reality is far more complex. Some of the most morally courageous acts in history, civil disobedience, whistleblowing, artistic rebellion, were illegal at the time. So the real question becomes, are you living by principles or by permissions? Growth requires friction. It requires disobedience, not the reckless kind, but the conscious kind. The kind that says, I see the rule and I understand why it exists, but I choose to go beyond it because my conscience demands it. That's the kind of disobedience that births revolutions, innovations, and awakenings. And yet, it's precisely that kind of disobedience that most governments fear, because obedient citizens are predictable. They are easy to manage. They don't ask hard questions. They don't disturb the status quo. They keep the machine running, even if the machine is broken. But here's the twist: the machine is broken. We see it in the growing alienation, the mental health crisis, the bureaucratic paralysis, the loss of meaning in modern life. We were told that if we followed the rules, we'd be happy, safe, successful. But what we got instead was a world of quiet desperation. A world where people are overworked, under-inspired, and spiritually starved. And that's not just a personal crisis, it's a civilizational one. Because a society of obedient people doesn't innovate. It doesn't evolve. It doesn't grow. So what's the alternative? Courage. Not the kind of courage that makes headlines, but the subtle, daily courage to think for yourself and to question inherited truths, to resist the pressure to conform, to live by your own moral compass, even when it's inconvenient. That kind of courage is rare, but it's also contagious. And when you live it, you give others permission to do the same. Let me ask you something that might shake you. If tomorrow all the rules you follow vanished, if there were no laws, no punishments, or no expectations, what kind of person would you be? Would you collapse into chaos, or would you rise into clarity? Would you become dangerous, or would you become deeply human? That's the test of true character. That's the test of freedom. And that's why Thoreau was right. The best government rules the least because it trusts its people to become more than obedient subjects. It dares to believe that within each of us is not just the potential for self-rule, but the necessity of it. Because without self-rule, there is no real freedom. And without freedom, there is no real life. How freedom fuels meaning, why responsibility is the soul of liberty. Freedom is romanticized constantly. We talk about it as though it's a destination, a reward, a state of being that once achieved promises peace and happiness. But freedom, real freedom, isn't easy. It's not comfortable. In fact, it's one of the heaviest burdens a person can carry. Because true freedom demands something that most of us try to avoid at all costs: responsibility. And that's the paradox that cracks open the heart of Thoreau's wisdom. The best government rules the least, not because people are always good or always wise, but because becoming worthy of liberty requires us to own our lives completely, not partially, not when it's convenient. Completely, completely. Responsibility is not just about paying your bills or showing up to work. It's about owning your thoughts, your choices, your failures, and your triumphs. It's about refusing to outsource your conscience to anyone else, whether that's a government, a boss, a religious leader, or even a friend group. When you take full responsibility for your life, You become ungovernable, not in the sense of being lawless, but in the sense of being sovereign. You become someone who doesn't need to be ruled because you've learned to rule yourself. And that, right there, is the soul of liberty. But here's the painful truth. Most people don't want that kind of freedom. They want the illusion of freedom with the comfort of control. They want to feel like they're choosing their path, but within safe parameters already approved by someone else. They want to feel autonomous, but they also want someone to blame when things go wrong. And that's why so many governments thrive, not because they're wise, but because they offer people a deal. Give us your responsibility, and we'll give you security. Surrender your agency, and we'll protect you from the consequences of your own freedom. It sounds tempting, but every time we accept that deal, we lose a little bit of what makes us human. Do you know why responsibility is so powerful? Because it's the only thing that gives life depth. When you are responsible for your own path, every failure becomes a lesson, every success becomes a triumph of will, and every moment becomes meaningful. But you're no longer drifting, you're creating. You're not just surviving, you're choosing. That's what Thoreau meant when he talked about living deliberately. He wasn't advocating for selfishness or isolation. He was saying, take your life into your own hands, live as though it matters. Because it does. Here's a deep question to sit with. What would your life look like if you took responsibility for everything in it, not just the parts you're proud of, but the parts you hide, the parts you blame on others, the parts you pretend aren't yours? Would you become more free or less? Would you become heavier, or would you finally feel light? That's the strange and beautiful thing about responsibility. It doesn't weigh you down. It liberates you. It clears the fog. It strips away the noise. It makes everything real. And that's precisely why governments that overreach are so dangerous. Not just because they limit your actions, but because they dull your will. They create a culture of spectatorship, where people wait for orders instead of taking initiative, where problems are seen as someone else's job, where the question is always, what will they do, instead of, what will I do? But here's the revolutionary truth. The moment you stop waiting for permission, you start living a free life. Not a perfect life, not a safe life, but a real one. Thoreau wasn't naive. He knew that not everyone would rise to the occasion. He knew that freedom would reveal both the best and worst in people. But he also knew that a life lived under constant supervision isn't a life at all, it's a performance. A pre-approved, pre-scripted routine. And while that might be comfortable, it will never be meaningful. So when we say the best government rules the least, we're not just talking about smaller bureaucracies or fewer laws. We're talking about a radical shift in how we see ourselves. We're talking about becoming individuals who are strong enough, brave enough, and responsible enough to live without being constantly managed. Because in the end, freedom without responsibility is chaos, but responsibility without freedom is slavery. And only when the two are joined do we become truly human. The final awakening, why inner revolution is greater than any political change. We live in an age obsessed with external change. We rally for reforms, vote for different leaders, write petitions, march in the streets, all in the hope that if we can just adjust the machinery of government, life will get better. And sometimes it does. But more often than not, the deeper problems remain. Because no matter how many laws you pass or how many officials you replace, the soul of a society doesn't change until the individuals within it undergo a transformation. That's the revolution Thoreau was pointing to, not one of flags and protests, but one that begins in the quiet furnace of your own conscience. The best government rules the least, not because institutions are irrelevant, but because the real battlefield is internal. The real change begins with you. You see, we've been taught to believe that freedom is something granted to us by constitutions, by parliaments, by presidents. But that's a dangerous myth. Freedom is not given. It's claimed. It's something you seize the moment you stop waiting for someone else to liberate you. And that's why inner revolution is the only revolution that matters. Because when you change yourself, when you reclaim your capacity to think, to feel, to act with integrity, you're no longer a cog in someone else's machine. You become the author of your own life. This is why governments, no matter how well-intentioned, can never make you free. They can only get out of your way. They can remove barriers, yes. They can protect rights, yes. But they cannot make you courageous. They cannot make you wise. They cannot force you to wake up. That's your job, and it always has been. So ask yourself, how many of the problems you see in the world are reflections of the problems you avoid within yourself? How much of the corruption, the confusion, the apathy, how much of that begins with our own unwillingness to confront our fears, our laziness, our desire to be led instead of to lead? It's a hard truth, but it's a liberating one, because it means we're not powerless. It means the revolution doesn't depend on elections or revolts. It depends on whether we're willing to become the kind of people who don't need to be governed in the first place. Imagine a world where individuals are so self-aware, so morally grounded, so deeply committed to truth, that government becomes almost irrelevant. Not because chaos reigns, but because order emerges naturally from the character of the people. That's not utopia, that's maturity. That's what it looks like when a society grows up. And it starts with each of us making a simple but radical decision to stop outsourcing our responsibility to others, and to start living as if our choices actually shape the world, because they do. And Thoreau understood this. That's why he didn't waste time trying to fix the system from within. He stepped outside of it, not to escape, but to demonstrate that there's another way to live, a freer way, a more conscious way. He didn't shout into the noise. He built a life of silence, reflection, and deliberate action. And in doing so, he became louder than any politician ever could. You don't need to live in the woods to do the same. What you need is the courage to take your life seriously, to question everything, to trust yourself, to act from principle, not pressure. Inner revolution isn't flashy. It doesn't trend on social media, but it's the only thing that has ever truly changed the world. So when we say the best government rules the least, we're not just talking about politics. We're talking about a new kind of human being, one who doesn't wait for permission to become free, one who doesn't need constant supervision to do what's right, one who lives not by fear, but by purpose. And maybe the final question is this: are you ready to stop being ruled? Because the moment you are, no government can hold you. And that's when the real revolution begins.